Good day. Let's have a discussion on lymphatic system. One of the basic tenets of life is that many organisms consume or use other organisms in order to survive. Some microorganisms, such as certain bacteria or viruses, use humans as a source of nutrients and as an environment where they can survive and reproduce. As a result, some of these microorganisms can damage the body, causing disease or even death. Not surprisingly, the body has ways to resist or destroy harmful microorganisms. In this chapter, we will consider how the lymphatic system and the components of other systems such as white blood cells and phagocytes continually provide protection against invading microorganisms. Although lymphatic system may be considered part of the circulatory system, we will consider it separately because its functions are so different from those of the heart and the blood vessels. Keep in mind, however, that all of these functions are interdependent. Lymphatic system includes lymph, lymphocytes, lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, tonsils, spleen, and the thymus gland. The lymphatic system is responsible for returning tissue fluid to the blood and for protecting the body against foreign materials. And because of this, these parts of the lymphatic system is very important. Let's have the functions of lymphatic system. The lymphatic system is the part of the body's defense system against microorganisms and other harmful substances. In addition, it helps to maintain fluid balance in tissues to absorb fat from digestive tract. Mainly, there are three main functions of lymphatic system: the fluid balance, fat absorption, and defense. Let's start with the fluid balance. About 30 liters of fluid pass from the blood capillaries into the interstitial space each day, whereas only 27 liters from the interstitial spaces back into the blood capillaries. If the extra 3 liters of interstitial fluid, the interstitial is between cells, spaces between cells, if this 3 liters, extra 3 liters of interstitial fluid remain in the interstitial spaces, edema would result, causing tissue damage and eventually death. The 3 liters of fluid enters the lymphatic capillaries, where the fluid is called lymph, meaning a clear spring water, and it passes through the lymphatic vessels to return to the blood. In addition to water, lymph contains solute derived from two sources: substances in plasma, such as ions, nutrients, gases, and some proteins, pass from blood capillaries into the interstitial spaces and become part of the lymph. Substances such as hormone, enzymes, and waste products derived from cells within the tissues are also part of the lymph. So again, when the extra 3 liters of fluid enters the lymphatic capillaries, the fluid is called lymph, and it passes to the lymphatic vessels to return the blood. Next functions of lymphatic system is fat absorption. The lymphatic system absorbs fats and other substances from the digestive tract. Special lymphatic vessels called lacteals, or relating to milk, are located in the lining of the small intestine. Fats enter the lacteals and pass through the lymphatic vessels to the venous circulation. The lymph passing through these lymphatic vessels has a milky appearance because of its fat content. It is called chyle. And number three, you do having the defense. Microorganisms and other foreign substances are filtered from lymph by lymph nodes and from blood by the spleen. In addition, lymphocytes and other cells are capable of destroying microorganisms and foreign substances because in lymphatic system, this includes our immunity and also the thymus gland, which produce T lymphocytes responsible for our immune system. Let's go on with lymphatic capillaries and vessels. And some of the terminology is important in lymphatic system. Let's define first this lymphatic capillaries. The lymphatic system, unlike the circulatory system, does not circulate fluid to and from tissues. Because in the circulatory system, the blood flowing systematically. Instead, the lymphatic system carries fluid in one direction, from tissues to the circulatory system. Fluid moves from blood capillaries into tissue spaces. Most of the fluid returns to the blood, but some of the fluid moves from the tissue spaces into lymphatic capillaries to become lymph. The lymphatic capillaries are tiny close-ended vessels consisting of simple squamous epithelium. The lymphatic capillaries are some more permeable than blood capillaries because they lack a basement membrane and fluid moves easily into the lymphatic capillaries. Overlapping squamous cells of the lymphatic capillary walls act as valves that prevent the backflow of fluid. So lymph in that name is the name for tissue fluid that enters lymph capillaries. Filtration is in capillaries creates tissue fluid from blood plasma, most of which returns almost immediately to the blood in the capillaries by osmosis or from area of higher concentration to lower concentration. Some tissue fluid, however, remains in interstitial spaces and must be returned to the blood by way of lymphatic vessels. Without this, blood volume and blood pressure would very soon decrease. As you can see on there's the relationship of the lymphatic vessels to the cardiovascular system on the diagram. Wherein most of the fluids from the blood capillaries into tissue spaces, and most of the fluid returns to the blood, but some of the fluid moves from tissue spaces into the lymphatic capillaries to become lymph. Okay. Let's have the lymph vessels. The system of lymph vessels begin as dead-end lymph capillaries found in most tissue spaces. Lymph capillaries are very permeable and collect tissue fluid and proteins. As I mentioned a while ago, lacteals are specialized lymph capillaries in the villi of the small intestine. They absorb the fat-soluble end products of digestion, such as the fatty acids and vitamins, or the fat-soluble vitamins, the ADE, vitamin A, D, E, and K. As you can see on the figure, the lymph The system of lymph vessels begin as dead-end capillaries. Unlike with the circulatory system, that the blood flow systematically. Lymph capillaries unite to form larger lymph vessels whose structure is very much like that of veins. There is no pump for lymph. There is no pump for lymph. Unlike with the heart, unlike with the blood, there is a pumping of blood, which is your heart. But the lymph, which is not no pump for lymph, the lymph is kept moving within lymph vessels with the same mechanism that promote venous return. The venous small muscle layer of the larger lymph vessel constrict and one-way bulb prevents backflow of lymph. Lymph vessels in the extremities, especially the legs, are compressed by skeletal muscles that surround them. It's the skeletal muscle pump. So where is the lymph going? Back to the blood to become plasma again. The lymph vessels from the lower body unite in front of the lumbar vertebra at your back to form a vessel called cisterna chyli, which continues upward in front of the backbone as the thoracic duct. Lymph vessels from the upper left quadrant of the body join the thoracic duct, which empties lymph into the left subclavian vein. Lymph vessels from the upper right quadrant of the body unite to form the right lymphatic duct, which empties lymph into the right subclavian vein. I repeat, lymph vessels from the left upper quadrant of the body join thoracic duct that empties lymph into the left subclavian vein. And then the upper right quadrant to form the right lymphatic duct and empties into the right subclavian vein. Let's have the lymphatic nodes. Lymphatic tissue consists mainly of lymphocytes in mesh-like framework of connective tissue. As we remember that most lymphocytes are produced from stem cells in the red bone marrow, then migrate to the lymph nodes and nodules, to the spleen and to the thymus. Today, lymph nodes and nodules are masses of lymphatic tissue. Nodes and nodules differ with respect to size and location. Nodes are usually larger, 10 to 20 millimeters in length, and are encapsulated. Nodules range from fraction of millimeter to several millimeters in length and do not have capsules. Lymph nodes are found in groups along the pathways of lymph vessels, and lymph flows through these nodes on its way to the subclavian vein. Lymph enters a node through several afferent lymph vessels, leaves through one or two efferent vessels. As you can see on the photo, is the lymph node. A section through a lymph node showing the flow of lymph and a microscopic detail of bacteria being destroyed within the lymph node. Nodules are small masses of lymphatic tissue found just beneath the epithelium of all mucous membrane. the body system lined with mucous membrane are those that have openings to the environment, the respiratory, digestive, urinary, and reproductive tract. Those system lines with mucous membrane. You can probably see that these are also strategic locations for lymph nodules because any natural body openings is a possible portal of entry for pathogens. For example, if bacteria is inhaled, air gets through the epithelium of the trachea. Lymph nodules with their macrophages are in position to destroy these bacteria before they get to the blood. Some of the nodules have specific names. Those of the small intestine are called Peyer's patches, and those of the pharynx are called tonsils. The palatine tonsils are on the lateral wall of the pharynx. The adenoid, or the pharyngeal tonsils, is on the posterior wall, and the lingual tonsils are on the base of the tongue. The tonsils form a ring of lymphatic tissue around the pharynx, which is a common pathway for food and air and for pathogens they contain. In cases of problem of tonsils, you do have the procedures called tonsillectomy. Now, let's have the flow of lymphatic system. For you to be able to understand, let's have the overview. As you can see on the diagram, on the illustration, look on the letter A to follow the flow. On the lymphatic capillaries, remove fluid from tissue. The fluid becomes lymph. Then, lymph flows through lymphatic vessels, which have valves that prevent the backflow of lymph. Lymph nodes filter lymph and are sites where lymphocytes respond to infection. Then, lymph enters the thoracic duct or the right lymphatic duct. On the fifth step, lymph enters the blood. And then lacteals in the small intestine absorb fats, which enters the thoracic duct. Chyle, which is lymph containing fats, enters the blood. The spleen filters blood and is a site where lymphocytes respond to infection. On number 9, the lymphocytes B and T cells originate from stem cells in the red bone marrow. These B cells become mature B cells in the red bone marrow and are released into the bloodstream. And then these T cells enter the blood and migrate to thymus. On the thymus, is where pre-T cells derived from red bone marrow increase in number and becomes mature T cells that are released into the blood. These B and T cells from the blood enter and populate all lymphatic tissues. These lymphocytes can remain in tissues or pass through them and return to the blood. B and T cells can also respond to infection by dividing and increasing in number. Some of the newly formed cells enter the blood and circulate to other tissues. That's how the flow of lymphatic system. As we go along with the lymph node shows problems in the tonsils. Problem in the tonsils may result to procedure is called tonsillectomy, which is the removal of palatine tonsils in adenoid and may be performed if the tonsils are chronically inflamed and swollen, as may happen in children. As mentioned earlier, the body has redundant structures to help ensure survival. If one structure is lost or seriously impaired, thus there are many other lymph nodules in the pharynx to take over the functions of surgically removed tonsils. Let's have another parts of the body important in the lymphatic system, which is your spleen. The spleen is roughly the size of clenched fist and is located in the left superior corner of the abdominal cavity. The spleen has outer capsule of dense connective tissue and small amount of smooth muscles. Trabeculae from the capsule divide the spleen into small, interconnected compartments containing two specialized types of lymphatic tissue. The spleen contains white pulp and the red pulp. The white pulp is lymphatic tissue surrounding the arteries within the spleen, while the red pulp is associated with the veins. It consists of a fibrous network filled with macrophages, red blood cells, and enlarged capillaries that connects to the vein. In the fetus, the spleen produces red blood cells, a function assumed by the red bone marrow after birth. After birth, the spleen is very much like a large lymph node, except that its functions affect the blood that flow through its rather than lymph. So the spleen filters blood instead of lymph. The spleen filters blood instead of lymph. Cells within the spleen detect and respond to foreign substance in the blood and destroy worn out red blood cells. Lymphocytes in the white pulp can be stimulated in the same manner as in lymph nodes. Before blood leaves the spleen through veins, it passes to the red pulp. And then macrophages in the red pulp removes foreign substances and worn out red blood cells through phagocytosis. And this is the functions of the spleen after birth. Contains plasma cells that produce antibodies to foreign antigens. Contains fixed macrophages, the RE cells, that phagocytize pathogens or other foreign material in the blood. The macrophages of the spleen also phagocytize old red blood cells and form bilirubin by way of portal circulations. The bilirubin is sent to the liver for excretion in bile. And number three, stores platelet and destroy them when they are no longer useful. The spleen functions as a blood reservoir, holding a small volume of blood, while in emergency situations such as hemorrhage, smooth muscle in splenic blood vessels and in the splenic capsules can contract. The result is the movement of small amount of blood out of the spleen into the general circulation. That's why it is a blood reservoir. Problem in the spleen is not considered a vital organ. So problem or rupture in the spleen due to traumatic abdominal injuries can cause severe bleeding because it stores blood, shock, and possible death. So surgical intervention may stop the bleeding. Mesh wrap around the spleen can hold it together. And the surgical process is splenectomy. Removal of the spleen may be necessary if these techniques do not stop the bleeding. Other lymphatic organs and the liver compensate for the loss of the spleen's function. Again, the spleen is not considered a vital organ because other organs compensate for its functions if the spleen must be removed. The liver and the red bone marrow will remove old red blood cell and platelets from circulation. The many lymph nodes and nodules will phagocytize pathogens. and have lymphocytes to be activated and plasma cells to produce antibodies. Despite this redundancy, a person without spleen is somewhat more susceptible to certain bacterial infection, such as pneumonia and meningitis. Again, lymphocytes in the white pulp can be stimulated in the same manner as in lymph nodes. Before blood limps the spleen through veins, it passes through the red pulp. And macrophages in the red pulp removes foreign substances and worn out red blood cells through phagocytosis. And that's the functions of spleen. Let's go to thymus. We've mentioned on the endocrine system the thymus, which atrophied as into fat as gut ages. The thymus is a bilobe gland, roughly triangular in shape, as you can see on the photo. It is located in the superior mediastinum, the partition dividing the thoracic cavity into left and right parts. It was once thought that the thymus increased in size until puberty, after which it dramatically decreased in size. It is now believed that the thymus increases in size until the first year of life, after which it remains approximately the same size even though the size of the individual increases. After 60 years of age, it decreases in size, and in older adults, the thymus may be so small that it's difficult to find during dissection. Although the size of the thymus is fairly constant throughout much of the life, by 40 years of age, much of this thymus has been replaced with adipose tissue. So while as well, with increasing age, the thymus shrink and relatively little thymus tissue is found in adults. Though it is still active. That's how our thymus is. The thymus, the stem cells, which is hematocytoblast of the thymus, produce T lymphocytes or T cells. Their functions are discussed in the next section. Thymic hormones are necessary for what may be called immunological competence. Immunological competence means to be able to do something well. The thymic hormones enable the T cells to participate in the recognition of foreign antigens and to provide immunity. So the capability of T cells is established early in life and then perpetuated by the lymphocytes themselves. Like po dun sa ating immune system, kapag po newborn, hindi po ito fully mature, ang immune system ng newborn. Infants are more susceptible po for certain infection than older children and adults. Usually, kapag po we reach the age of 2 years old, the immune system matures and becomes fully functional. This is why some vaccines, such as measles vaccine, are not recommended for infants younger than 15 to 18 months of age. Their immune system are not mature enough to respond strongly to the vaccine. To complete provided the vaccine may be incomplete. Yeah. So let's go on with the immunity. Immunity may be defined as the ability to resist damage from foreign substances such as microorganisms and the harmful chemicals such as toxins released by microorganisms. This ability is of vital importance because the body is exposed to pathogens from the moment of birth. Its specificity and memory are characteristic of adaptive immunity. But let's start with the two types of other important terms. We do have the terms antigens. Antigens are chemical markers that identify cells. Human cells have their own antigens that identify all the cells in an individual as self. So when antigens are foreign or non-self, they may be recognized as such and destroyed. Kasi kalaban siya, like the white blood cell, if the entrance of pathogens able to macrophage or phagocytize. The same with the lymph nodes. So when bacteria, viruses, fungi, and protozoa are all foreign antigens that activate immune responses, as are cell products such as bacterial toxins. So malignant cells are those capable of abnormal cells, capable of invasion and metastasis, which may be formed in the body as a result of mutation. Abnormal cells are also recognized as foreign and are usually destroyed before they can establish themselves and cause cancer. So, immunity has two main components. We do have the innate immunity and adaptive immunity. The innate immunity may be called non-specific, does not create memory, and its responses are always the same regardless of target. Adaptive immunity is very specific as to its target, may involve antibodies, does not create memory, and may become more efficient. Both kinds of immunity work together to prevent damage and disease. Let's go on with those immunity. Let's start with innate immunity. Innate immunity is accomplished by mechanical mechanisms, chemical mediators, cells, and inflammatory response. You have to remember, in innate immunity, accomplished by mechanical mechanism, chemical mediators, cells, and inflammatory responses. Let's start with innate immunity, anatomic and physiological barriers, phagocytic and other defensive cells, and chemical secretions and reactions, including inflammations. Those help the body to accomplish this innate immunity, and these are not separate and indistinct. Rather, there is a great deal of overlap among them, as you will see. Let's start with barriers. So it serves as a barriers because, or what I've said is the mechanical mechanism, like the barriers. It prevents the entry of microorganisms and chemicals into the body in two ways. The skin and the mucous membrane form barriers that prevent the entry. As you can see, they help limit the growth of bacteria on the skin. So first one, the skin and mucous membrane forms barriers that prevent the entry. And as you can see po, you do having the mucous membrane of the respiratory, digestive. Yeah. Pumapasok po dito yung ating tears, saliva, and urine act to wash them from the surfaces of the body. Thus, microorganisms cannot cause a disease if they cannot get into the body. In that sense, innate immunity is serving as your barriers or mechanical mechanism. You do have defensive cells. Defensive cells, dyan po pumapasok yung ating phagocytic cells. Our phagocytic cells, let's first define po muna the phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is the ingestion and destruction of particles by cells called phagocytes. The Langerhans cell of the skin and other dendritic cells throughout the body also phagocytize foreign materials, engulfing, not merely to destroy it, but to take it to a lymph node, where the lymphocytes of adaptive immunity mechanism are then activated. And the macrophages are also involved in activating these lymphocytes. The particles can be microorganisms or their parts, foreign substance, or dead cells from the individual's body. And the most important phagocytes are neutrophils and macrophages, although other white blood cells also have limited phagocytic ability. Yeah. So yung neutrophil po natin, neutrophil are part of white blood cells, are small phagocytic cells that are usually the first cells to enter an infected tissue. So automatic po, kapag po kayo natusok, causing tissue injury, there is the part of the white blood cells, the neutrophils. Yan. Go into the infected tissue from the blood in large numbers. Neutrophils often die after phagocytizing a single microorganism. So after po yung involve yung pathogens, namamatay po ang ating neutrophils. Pus is an accumulation of fluid, dead neutrophils, and other cells at the site of infection. Yung macrophages naman po are monocytes that leave the blood, enter tissues, and enlarge about fivefold. Monocytes and macrophages form the mononuclear phagocytic system because they are phagocytes with a single unlobed nucleus. Sabi po dito, natural killer cells circulate in the blood but are also found in the red bone marrow, spleen, and lymph nodes. Yan. Nandiyan din po ang tinatawag natin na basophil, which are derived from the red bone marrow and are motile white blood cells that can leave the blood and enter infected tissues. Yan. Basophils and mast cells are connective tissue, defensive cells that are found throughout areolar connective tissue. Yan. Basophils po are activated through innate immunity, by complement, and through adaptive immunity. Yeah. So once when you have a tissue injury, there will be an attack of the neutrophil after phagocytis, then monocyte and the macrophages, then basophil and mast cell. Tinatawag po nating mast cells is derived from the red bone marrow and are non-motile cells in connective tissue, especially near capillaries. Like macrophages, mast cells are located at potentially points of entry for microorganisms into the body, such as the skin, lungs, gastrointestinal tract, and urinary tract. Yeah. So they produce histamine and leukotrienes. Histamine causes vasodilation and makes capillaries more permeable. Leukotrienes also increase capillary permeability and attract phagocytic cells. Ayun. In short po, as you mentioned go kanina, in natural killer cells, they are type of lymphocyte produced in the red bone marrow, and they account for up to 15% of lymphocytes. These NK cells recognize classes of cells such as tumor cells or virus-infected cells in general, rather than specific tumor cells or cell infected by a specific virus. So there are a variety of methods to kill their target cells, including the release of chemicals that damage cell membranes, causing cells to lysis. Ayan. Let's go on naman with the chemical defenses. So chemical defenses po, chemicals help the body resist infection, including interferons, complement, and the chemicals involved in the inflammation. So atin pong i-define yung interferons and complement. Yung complement po is a group of more than 20 plasma protein that circulate in the blood until activated. They are involved in the lysis of cellular antigens, yung breakdown ng antigens, and the labeling of non-cellular antigens. Some stimulate the release of histamine in inflammation, yung pamamaga. It's a normal body response. And the other attract WBC to the site. While in inflammation naman po, inflammation is ito po ay inflammatory response to injury involve many of the chemicals and cells previously discussed. This is like po with the pain. Most inflammatory responses are very similar, although some details can be varied depending on the intensity of the response and the type of injury. So dito po sa inflammation, it's general response to damage of any kind, microbial, chemical, physical. Yan. So automatic po, pag nagkaroon po ng tissue injury, there will be attack of basophils and mast cells, and then the neutrophils and macrophages and monocytes, and it will result to inflammation. And that's a normal body response. The inflammation po can be localized and systemic. Yan. So pag po localized inflammation, the inflammatory response confined to a specific area of the body. Yan. Nakikita niyo po kapag po namamagay ang inyong kamay because natusok, yung pong area na may inflammation, may makita po kayong redness, heat, swelling, pain, and loss of function. Redness, heat, and swelling result from increased blood flow and increased vascular permeability. Ayan po. Yun po ang localized inflammation. Systemic inflammation naman po, the inflammation response that is generally distributed through all parts of the body sa buong katawan. So in addition to the local symptoms at the site of inflammation, 3 additional features can be present. Kapag po systemic inflammation, nandyan po ang red bone marrow produces and releases large number of neutrophils kasi nga po systemic ang circulation natin. So kailangan natin ng more phagocytosis. Kailangan mag-release ang bone marrow ng more neutrophils. Number 2, pyrogens, chemicals released by microorganism. Neutrophils in other cells stimulate fever production. So pyrogens affect the body temperature regulating mechanism in the hypothalamus of the brain. As a consequence, since tumataas po ang ating temperature, heat productions and conservation increase, and body temperature increases. Fever, bakit po nagkakaroon ng lagnat? Ito po ay nakakatulong to promote the activities of immune system, such as phagocytosis, and inhibits the growth of some microorganism. That's what happened in systemic inflammation. So, again po, we have two inflammation can be localized or systemic. So, yan po ating barriers kanina. Again po, sa ating pong barriers, nandyan po ang ating mechanical mechanism. Just like the skin that produces mucous membrane that form the barriers that prevent their entry. You have also the tears and saliva to wash out the surfaces in the body. Nakita niyo po ating Langerhans, phagocytes, natural killer cells, and basophils and mast cells. Then the chemicals like the interferon. Yung ating pong interferons are proteins that protect the body against viral infection. When a virus infects a cell, the infected cell produces viral nucleic acid and proteins which are assembled into new viruses. So, nag-a-attack po against a virus is yung ating interferons to prevent a viral reproduction. Okay. Let's go on with the adaptive immunity. Adaptive immunity po, to adapt means to become suitable, and adaptive immunity can become suitable for and respond to almost any foreign antigen. So, I will mention lang po, the specificity and memory are two characteristics of adaptive immunity, but not innate immunity. Pag po sinabi natin specificity, the ability of the adaptive immunity to recognize a particular substance. It's like yung memory T cell. The memory T cell, so once po na-encounter niyo na po yung chickenpox, the second time the virus come in contact with you, your memory T cells will remember that it's a foreign body. So, specificity. What I mean is, they recognize a particular substance. For example, innate immunity can act against bacteria in general, where adaptive immunity can distinguish among different kinds of bacteria. For it, memory naman po is the ability of adaptive immunity to remember previous encounters with a particular substance. As a result, the response is faster, is stronger, and lasts longer. Yung po memory, kaya po nagkakaroon po tayo, for example, yung ngayon, COVID-19, so with the mRNA vaccine, the body is capable, memory T cells capable of remembering this kind of coronavirus by attacking it. So you do have the memory. So in innate immunity, each time the body is exposed to substances, the response is the same because specificity and memory of previous encounters are not present. For example, each time a bacterial cell is introduced into the body, it is phagocytized with the same speed and efficiency. In adaptive immunity, the response during the second exposure is faster and stronger than the response to the first exposure because immune system inhibits memory for the bacteria from the first exposure. Bacteria are destroyed before any symptoms develop and the person is said to be immune. Okay po, that's our adaptive immunity. And that consists of the B cells and the T cells. In embryo, T cells are produced in the bone marrow, thymus. They must pass through thymus where the thymic hormones or the thymosin bring about their maturations. And the T cells then migrate to the lymph nodes, spleen, and lymph nodules where they are found after birth. Ayan po. So the mechanism of immunity that involves T cells and B cells are specific, meaning that one foreign antigen is the target each time a mechanism is activated. Sabi ko nga po kanina, memory and specificity. A macrophage has receptor sites for foreign chemicals such as those bacteria, cell walls, or flagella, and make phagocytize just about any foreign material it comes across, making it a specificity. The first step in the destruction of pathogens or foreign cell is the recognition of its antigen as foreign. That's why we have a memory to determine if it is foreign or not. And the recognition of antigen as foreign initiates one or both of the mechanism of adaptive immunity and this cell-mediated immunity, called simply cellular immunity, in which T cells and macrophages participate, and antibody-mediated immunity or humoral immunity, which involves T cells, B cells, and macrophages. Yun po ang ating tatandaan. Kapag cell-mediated immunity o cellular immunity, T cells and macrophages participate. Kapag naman po antibody-mediated immunity or humoral immunity, T cells, B cells, and macrophages participate. Let's start with the cell-mediated immunity. The cell-mediated immunity, ayan po. Cell-mediated immunity, the mechanism of immunity does not result in productions of antibodies, but it is effective against intracellular pathogens such as viruses, fungi, malignant cells, and graft of foreign tissue. The first step is the recognition of the foreign antigen by macrophages and helper T cells, which become activated and are specific. Yeah. These activated T cells, which are antigen specific, divide many times to form memory T cells and cytotoxic T cells, called CD8. The memory T cells will remember the specific foreign antigen. Sabi ko po sa inyo kanina, because of this memory, matatandaan po niyo yung mga kalaban. It is foreign and become active if it enters the body again. Cytotoxic T cells naman po are able to chemically destroy foreign antigens by disrupting cell membranes. This is how cytotoxic T cells destroy cells infected with viruses and prevent the viruses from reproducing. These T cells also produce cytokines, which are chemicals that attract macrophages to the area and activate them to phagocytize the foreign antigen and cellular debris. Once again po, meron po tayong memory T cells to remember specific antigens so that they will be a faster attack on the foreign body. Yung naman pong cytotoxic T cells are chemically destroy foreign antigens by disrupting cells. Yeah. They produce po cytokines. Cytokines po are representing chemical signals attracting macrophages para kainin o phagocytize yung mga foreign antigen na pumasok sa ating katawan. Yan. So it was believed that another subset of T cells serve to stop the immune response, but this may not be soon. It seems probable that CD4 and CD8 cells also produce feedback chemicals to limit immune response once the foreign antigen has been destroyed. Ayun po ating T cells, killer and cytotoxic. Yan po ating cell-mediated immunity. Cell-mediated immunity, early investigators of the immune system found that when plasma from immune animals was injected into the blood of a non-immune animal, the non-immune animal became immune. Because this process involved body fluids, it was called humoral immunity. On the other hand naman po ito. And it also discovered that blood cells alone could be responsible for immunity, and this process called cell-mediated immunity. At doon na nga po pumapasok yung ating memory T cells, helper T cells, and cytotoxic T cells, which able to phagocytize, like with the leukotrienes that attract the macrophages to phagocytize those foreign material. On the antibody mediated immunity naman po, tinatawag natin humoral, the mechanism does involve the production of antibodies. So, the first step is the recognition of the foreign antigen, kagaya din po kanina, ng kalaban. This time naman po, hindi na T cells, kundi B cells, as well as by macrophages and helper T cells lang. The synthesized helper T cell presents the foreign antigen to B cells, which provides a strong stimulus for the activation of B cells specific for this antigen. Ayan, kung makita niyo po, helper T cells presents to B cells. Papakita po niya after having the receptor sites. So the synthesized helper T cells present the foreign body to B cells, which provides a strong stimulus for the activations of B cells specific for this antigen. Then i-activate po natin yung B cells. The activated B cells begin to divide many times, and two types of cells are formed. Some of the new B cells produced are memory B cells, which will remember the specific antigen. Kaya meron po siyang memory B cells. So after presenting sa B cells, producing memory B cells, and it initiates a rapid response upon a second exposure. Other B cells become plasma cell. Kaya nakita niyo po yan sa inyong photo ay plasma cell that produce antibodies specific for this one foreign antigen. So antibodies po, puproduce po yung ating katawan ng antibody also called immunoglobulins, are proteins shaped somewhat like letter Y. Antibodies do not themselves destroy foreign antigens, but rather become attached to such antigen to label them for destruction. Ayan. So yung pong plasma will produce antibodies, and then the antibodies will attach to a specific antigen para magbigay dun sa katawan natin na i-destroy ito for destruction. So each antibody produce is specific for only one antigen, because there are so many different pathogens. You might think that the immune system would have to be capable of producing many different antibodies. And in fact, this is so. It is estimated that millions. You might think that the immune system would have to be capable of producing many different antibodies. And in fact, this is so. It is estimated that millions of different antigen-specific antibodies can be produced, and should there be a need for them. The structure of antibodies will be presented below, but let's have first the classes of antibodies. Yan po ating classes of antibodies. You have the immunoglobulin G. Location po niya is in your blood and extracellular fluid. Functions niya, it crosses the placenta to provide passive immunity for newborns and provides long-term immunity following recovery or a vaccine. Immunoglobulin G. Immunoglobulin A, external secretion, tears, and saliva, present in breast milk to provide passive immunity for breastfed infants, found in secretions of all mucous membrane. Immunoglobulin M, or the blood, produced first by maturing immune system of infants, produced first during an infection. Immunoglobulin G, production follows and part of the ABO blood group. Yun naman po ating immunoglobulin D ay located in the B lymphocytes. Ang function niya ay receptors on B lymphocytes. Immunoglobulin E, mast cells or basophils important in allergic reactions. In the mast cells release histamine. Kanina po, nabanggit po yun dun sa ating inflammation. Yun po ating classes of antibodies. So, there are some important laboratory tests po involved antibodies and may be very useful to confirm a diagnosis. Diyan po pumapasok yung ating complement fixation test. And antibody titer. Yung complement fixation test po, which is common in the laboratory, determines po the presence of particular antibody in the patient's blood, but does not indicate when the infection occur. Determine lang po particular antibody. Yung antibody titer naman, level or amount of specific antibody in the patient's blood. Just like yung hepatitis titer, so it will determine how many antibody ang mayroon pa sa ating dugo. If another titer is done 1 to several weeks later, an increase in the antibody level shows the infection to be current. So, kung marami ka pa antibodies, may panlaban ka pa dun sa HEPA. Kaya nagkakaroon tayo ng hepatitis vaccine. And the fluorescent antibody test uses antibodies tagged with fluorescent dyes, which are added to a specific clinical specimen, such as blood, sputum, or biopsy of tissue. So as stated here, if the suspected pathogen is present, the fluorescent antibodies will bond to it and the antibody antigen complex will glow when examined with the fluorescent microscope. So yun po yung tatlo. Fluorescent, antibody test, antibody titer, and complement fixation test. Alright, let's move with the antibody responses. Antibodies can affect antigens either directly or indirectly. Direct effect occurs when a single antibody binds to antigen and it activates the antigen. And when many antigens are bound together and are inactivated by many antibodies, which is capable of remembering this after attachment for destruction. So let's have more specifically, antibodies cause agglutination or neutralization of pathogens before their eventual destruction. So agglutination means clumping, and this is what happens when antibodies bind to bacterial cells. The bacteria that are clumped together by attaching antibodies are more easily phagocytized by micropunctures. Yun po ang ating agglutination. Okay. Let's have the types of immunity. Again po, if we consider the sources of immunity, that is where it comes from, and we can begin with two major categories: genetic immunity and acquired immunity. When we say genetic immunity, it is conferred by our DNA, and acquired immunity is developed or acquired by natural or artificial means. Kapag naman po sinabi nating genetic immunity, it does not involve antibodies or the immune system. It's the result of our genetic makeup. What this means that some pathogens cause disease in certain host species, but not in others. Yung po ating dogs and cats. Dogs and cats, for example, have genetic immunity to the measles virus, which is pathogen only for people. Mouse leukemia viruses affect only mice, not affect people. We have a genetic immunity to them. This is not because we have antibodies against these mouse viruses, but rather that we have genes that are the codes for the proteins that make it impossible for such pathogen to reproduce in our cell. That's why yung dogs and cats, although they having measles virus, hindi capable ang ating ang virus na yun dun sa ating cell. Ganun din yung sa mouse leukemia viruses. Ganun din yung ating monkeys. Like monkeys have similar protective genes and proteins for the human AIDS viruses. Kaya po yung galing pong AIDS virus, HIV virus, does not cause disease in this monkey naman. Because this is genetic characteristic program in DNA, and genetic immunity always lasts a life. So yung acquired immunity naman po does not involve antibodies. Passive immunity means that antibodies are from other source, whereas active immunity means the individual produces his own antibody. Kapag na-expose po tayo sa certain diseases. Again po, we do having this Types of immunity, you do having the acquired adaptive immunity. Siya po ay nahahati into two, active immunity and passive immunity. Yung active immunity po is the individual's own immune system in the cause of the immunity, while the passive immunity is transferred from another person or an animal. So natural antigens are introduced through natural exposure. Artificial antigens are deliberately introduced in a vaccine. While in passive immunity, natural antibodies from the mother are transferred to her child across the placenta or in milk. While in passive, artificial antibodies produced by another person or an animal are injected. So those are short discussion on the types of immunity. All right, and that is our discussions on the lymphatic system. Just like to mention some of the disorder encountered during this lymphatic system discussion. You do have an allergy. Hypersensitivity reaction is a harmful response to an antigen that does not stimulate an adaptive immune response in most people. So they encounter such like allergy or hypersensitivity reactions. There are such called as immunodeficiency. Immunodeficiency, a failure of some part of the immune system to function properly. Usually, if there's a decrease in number of white blood cell, we can say you are immunodeficient. While the immune disease, autoimmune disease, the immune system incorrectly treats self-antigens as foreign antigens. So yung kanyang sariling antigen ay kalaban na din. So autoimmune disease operates through the same mechanism as hypersensitivity reaction, except that the reaction is stimulated by self-antigen. Example po ng ating autoimmune disease are thrombocytopenia, lupus erythematosus, rheumatoid arthritis, rheumatic fever, diabetes mellitus type 1,